Okay. 3, 2, 1. Good evening, everybody. If anybody is here, Carlos is. But good evening, and welcome to this wonderful little storyteller chat.
Yes, a sort of.
We're going to talk about all the things that we didn't get to do in Blood on the Tamesis.
Yeah, it's going to be a bit of a mix, isn't it? A bit of nostalgia, a bit of spilling the beans about what was really going on, and also, yeah, like you say, there were things that we planned we didn't quite get to, so we'll talk about that as well. Hello, everybody saying hello. We can see you. It's very exciting.
Yes, you can see yourself.
In fact, I'm not used to this because normally when I'm running the Tamesis sessions, I don't have any idea what people are saying in chat until after the fact. So it's quite, I can get insults in real time, which is quite nice.
So yes, hello everybody.
So it's probably worth saying actually, if people have questions and things, if you throw them into chat, and we will do our best to answer them as we go.
Yes, we will be. Yeah, this is like an open discussion. Ask us stuff at any point, and we may or may not answer you then, or a short while afterwards. So, thank you, Kirsty. Thank you. Yes, lockdown, I think, has done some slight wonders for my hair.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I think a good place to start is that I wanted to ask you how you feel about everything now, because we've been doing this for about a year now.
I'd say just slightly over a year, probably.
And it's all over.
It is all over. There was a sort of... It was a bit weird last week, actually, because obviously when we normally run these streams, we run them in the same location, so all the players and the storyteller stuff together. So if there is like an end of a season or a chronicle, everyone will hang out and, you know, have a little mini party. As much as I still party these days, anyway. And, oh, hi Monique, by the way.
Hello.
But yeah, this was a kind of a weird thing in that we sort of just, you know, you switch off the stream and that's that. But luckily, I'm happy to tell you that there was sausages, ice cream, and rum.
Yes,
so it was quite good, really.
Was,
yeah. So thank you especially to Carlos for his participation.
Indeed.
Bringing the rum to the table. Very good.
It's a very valuable service.
Yeah. So it's weird, I think, but it's also that, you know, when we were coming to do this stream tonight, it was quite nice not really having to engage my brain. It's quite quite good.
I did all the planning for once.
Yeah, this is all Mitch. I'm just here to lounge around and make comments occasionally.
You can see this new tech. I had to tell Peter to not wear blue, otherwise he would fade wonderfully into the background.
Now, can anyone guess what I wore when I turned up?
Yes, he did turn up wearing all blue, which I think is a little bit how most of the Chronicle went. Well, that's what I said that you should do one thing.
But whatever you do, remember.
Did the opposite. No, but like, I guess, are you pleased with how it went? Do you think there are, you know, are there any massive things that you wish you'd maybe done better, or?
Well. So I noticed there's a question talking about if we can talk about how we built the domain of Oxford. It's obviously a completely different question, but I quite fancy it. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, that's what I was going to segue into anyway.
Because one of the interesting things about Tamesis was it had to happen quite fast, and I definitely want to, I guess, give honourable mentions to people who had to work incredibly sort of hard and also incredibly fast in a short period of time. Like, we used to make jokes around the start of Tamesis about how we'd locked Mitch in a cupboard and he couldn't come out until everything was done. They were not jokes. They were just the truth. We just say, come down, stay, do all the work. And I remember, because we had like photo shoots for the characters and monologues for the characters and stuff like that, because of the time being so tight, we had to do it all in one day. So Dilly had to basically had to work this ridiculous shift where we just like occasionally you'd like feed him, give him a bit of water or something and a bit of sugar and like keep going. Yeah, it was a hell of a thing. So one of the, when, you know, thinking about building the domain was that we had to build it really fast, right? When before we locked Mitch in a cupboard, there was a point where we locked Mitch in the front room with me, and we basically created the domain of Oxfordshire in like a 12-hour marathon.
Yeah, we did. Which I mean, we can show. Should we show them now, or should we show them in a bit when we start to talk about SPCs?
We can. Well, why don't you give them a sneak tease? A sneak tease. Also, I'm hoping that your keen tech brain is catching all these questions as they're going by.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So, Sparrowed, we will definitely be getting around to things that we missed and couldn't explore fully. That will definitely be a part of this, but we will get to that later, I assure you. Okay, a little sneak peek.
Yeah, a tease.
Sneak tease.
I do like a tease when it involves a Kumu map. So if you can...
Hang on. Why? Oh, no. Wait.
Have we got a technical difficulty screen we can put up?
No,
So that's all right. So Mitch was kind of talking about, like, jokingly about things being problematic or going wrong, and it was an interesting thing with Tamesis that we had.
There we go.
Ooh. Yeah, not only that we had to put things together very fast, but also partway through the Chronicle, of course, COVID happened and changed everything about what we were doing and our tech setup, and also our ability to adapt to things, because obviously, ordinarily, we'd have everybody on site. So if there's a problem, everyone's on site to do it. Whereas we had like this weird situation one week where Dilly was basically operating the stream remotely.
Sorry, I've just seen Becca's in chat, and her username is Monumental Skills.
Ah, nice.
Which is nice. Also an inside joke that nobody will understand, but we appreciate it, and that's what matters here.
I feel weirdly like I'm in school because I'm getting peer pressure to beatbox. Actually, beatboxing Peter is way less cool than technical difficulties beatboxing Peter, I have to say.
Yeah.
But
I can confirm.
But yeah, like there were times where Dylan was doing tech, but he couldn't be here, so he was doing the tech through my computer, but operating it remotely. I think, as I said in the time, like the villain in Mass Effect 2, which gave me no end of joy. But it was just kind of weird.
Yeah. So I remember, you know, when we sort of were first starting the planning, that you came to me and you went, Mitch, I've got an idea for a domain, right? How about this? It's like Arthurian knights, but they're all vampires. And I was like, now you're speaking my language.
Yeah, Vampire Knights, I was just like, that's cool. That's got to be cool.
Yeah. And it turns out that it was cool.
It was quite cool. So we should probably talk a bit about, actually, because, you know, people say, well, what was it like creating the domain? We haven't really told them what we did.
No.
So we should probably do that.
Okay. So I think first we kind of got a core idea down of, you know, what were the general themes that we were looking at in the domain, what were the tenets that we were going to use, because we decided early on that the SPCs would all abide by the same tenets that the players did.
Yes.
And that's actually something that we did throughout the Chronicle, was that SPCs would also get stains when they broke the tenets, and kind of progress like that. So obviously when you're working the game like that, it's going to build a specific type of world, right? Where all of the SPCs are conforming to these same ideas to keep hold of their humanity, and that you know, it kind of changes how it is a bit, because obviously, you know, in Blood on the Thames, for example, you had SPCs that were like monsters, right? And would break the tennis all the time, and they would not care about it. Which I think is definitely a way that you can play this game.
Yeah, it's kind of a way to define the difference, I guess, between elders often and neonates and things.
Yeah.
I think, though, one of the things, you know, as a player, I always hate it when I have the feeling that the players are getting ruined by everything, but the SPCs sort of skip through without consequence. And I think there were two things really in what Mitch was saying. One is that we wanted the Chronicle tenets to be kind of overt, you know, like they're not just a thing in the background about, oh, you know, you should be a good person or whatever. They were an actual oath. The oath to Oxfordshire made up the tenets themselves. And then the other thing was, you know, it took a lot of work, and I think it's something that I would have maybe not done quite as much if I'd been doing it on my own. But because Mitch was here, it meant like when sessions had occurred, then it'd be like, okay, let's now make remorse checks for all of the SPCs that have broken the tenets for various reasons. Because I kind of like the idea that they are also subject to degeneration just as much as the players are. And indeed, some of them did degenerate quite dramatically over the course of the Chronicle.
Yes.
And that's
Indeed.
fun, right? I think that's good.
Indeed.
And also, something else I felt quite strongly about was sometimes I wanted SPCs to say, come to court hungry, or to have messed up and get in trouble, because sometimes it can feel, I think, in a game that it's always the players that are the ones that are getting into the bad books of the prince, because they're the ones that we're focused on, so we're watching their errors and their problems, and they're always coming back to bite them. So there's a thing I notice about which of the players had the best hair. Well, I'm assuming, of course, that you mean characters by that. So I would say almost certainly Velvet. And, you know, obviously, as you know, Velvet's hair was modelled on Mitch's hair, so that's a thing.
There's logical consistency there. So I think once we'd done that and we knew, you know, what our tenets were, what are the things that we were looking at, sort of this idea of around the oath and a whole domain that was built around kind of the honor of knights that obviously, you know, in Elders kind of gets a bit twisted over time. And I think after that we came on to basically sitting down and looking at this. Now I need to move us. Let's move chat as well. We'll move them over here. Oh no, because we need the details. Bye, chat.
Sorry, chat. We can still see you. Don't you worry. So yeah, one of the things that I also think that happens is once you say, right, we've got these knights and we've got these elders, then, because one of the things that I wanted in Tamesis was an unusual domain where there were way more elders than normal, because normally elders don't all like to hang out together too much. But because of the oath and the setup, it kind of allowed that to be a thing. But also, if you've got a bunch of elders, it's like, how do they even survive? Because most of them don't know what cars are or what telephones are or cameras and things like that. So you kind of need to keep them in a nice, safe box. So a lot of the elders spent their time, you know, just in their havens, having blood brought to them on a regular basis. And essentially the city was being run by lots of hard-working ancilla and neonates.
Yeah, so we had this Kuman map where so this are the bloodlines, as you can see. These are the bloodlines of the city. So we sort of had everyone mapped out, and we kind of vaguely mapped out what we kind of wanted each of the clans to look like without filling characters in.
Yeah.
And then kind of slowly filled things in from there.
So one of the things about doing this that was super fun actually was we suddenly had a case of like, okay, we've got all of these Ventru, so we need to think of all of the Ventru Banes, you know.
Yeah.
And this gave me a real kind of appreciation for just how cool Ventru Banes are in terms of defining the characters, because if you only feed on one type of person for hundreds of years, that affects where you hang out, it affects the kind of blood you're always tasting, the kind of resonances you're more likely to get than others.
Yeah, which I also feel like vampires, you know, that you could certainly have an idea where the more of a resonance a vampire feeds on over time, that it kind of...
Yeah, it impacts their mood, it impacts their behaviour. Let's talk about some of the Banes, because the Banes are fun.
Let's talk... Okay, so we've got all the Ventru here. Good old Enolf. Noble Souls. That's a classic.
Yeah, so Enolf had to feed on noble souls.
Mm-hmm. We had Wraith, who...
You may not always be able to see them. There are also some very silly notes that we made as we were going.
Oh, yeah, like this.
So in my head, Wraith was a vampiric Rees-Mogg, if anyone knows British politicians.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Once the Alvarez the Older, we had that idea from the start.
Yeah, I know.
Whoa, dude. We actually did plan something.
We did actually plan nearly everything. It was pretty amazing.
That's cool. Yeah. So Wraith for aristocracy. Rupert.
Rupert. Let's do Rupert. Rupert was horrific, and everybody guessed he was horrific.
Yeah.
And he was,
yes.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Let's do...
Oh, right, yeah, they can't see the full details because we're in the way.
Oh, our stupid heads.
Yeah,
Rupert is gross. Let's talk about
Rupert
some...
has beef with Finn. I don't know if we ever used that. So this map is kind of an artifact.
Yeah, it was an artifact of the 12-hour marathon that we then used to build everything else around. So what about... So Jeffrey... Oh yeah, scrawny shit. One of my favourites. So Jeffrey's had to be high. Yeah. So Jeffrey was always peddling drugs and hanging out with the student community and that kind of thing, and was very much on the radar of the Second Inquisition.
Yeah.
Anne's one of my favourites.
And feeds on the ill.
Yeah.
So, without getting too political here, I definitely think that we, with the Ventru, we're trying to create this kind of exaggerated, kind of perverse, like upper class.
Yeah, they were generally pretty awful. I think certainly some people want to know about Adam's feeding Bane.
Oh,
Adams was greater too because he had to feed on the sorrowful or the depressed.
Yeah.
Yes.
And as you can see, we had this idea of him that he kind of fed like a siren, but it was more like offering emotional support to people that are alone and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So one of the things with Adam was that he was obviously taking on other people's burdens and listening to this stuff all the time, and then obviously feeding them on them. And one of the nice things about Velvet's plotline was that, of course, Velvet's blood was not melancholic. So normally Adam is always feeding on depressed blood, right? And Adam is miserable. But when he feeds from Velvet, he's not, which is one of the reasons why for him the blood bond was so attractive.
Yes. We've got, of course, Wallace.
Yeah, so Wallace had to feed on people who are subjugated because he's a hero.
I like also the as predator type Osiris Workers Union. Like the worst workers union going.
Yes.
So as you can see, well, if I move to the side, we sort of filled this out. So obviously Wallace, we knew would be...
Yeah, he'd be significant.
That it would be important to know what his skills were, right? So we kind of detailed his... what we thought his
his disciplines
his
and
disciplines
things
would be, yes. Whereas, I mean, if you look at poor Leona.
Yeah. Oh, who had to feed on survivors of trauma, but she never really became a feature of the Chronicle.
No.
But I guess this was one of the things actually when obviously creating a domain can be a huge amount of work, and obviously your players aren't going to care about every single kindred and every single relationship, and also you're not in the stream going to have time to cover it. but it gave us a template, and then if we could see that things were coming forward, we could then expand on those and develop them sort of as we go.
Let's talk about Seth. Redheads. Simple.
Simples.
He's a simple man on Humanity 2.
Yeah, so one of the... when Silas's prelude was going on, and I think Jenny first appeared, I made her a redhead because just on the off chance I could do a hilarious Seth sees Jenny plot.
Yes.
But luckily for everyone, that didn't happen.
I mean, that would have been awful. That would have been awful. But Seth, Humanity 2, he was one of our lower humanity things. But we had a few characters, but we tried to make them low humanity in different ways.
Yes. And there were a lot of low humanity kindred in Oxfordshire. I mean, obviously Enolf was low.
And Enolf was 2. By the end, he was 1.
He was he was bordering on... I mean, so what happened for Enolf was... Enolf had to feed on the noble, I believe.
Yeah, noble souls.
Noble souls. So the thing about Enolf was the things that kept him going were the Oath, the Sabbat War, and Isabel. Mm-hmm. But Isabel only half kept him going because he'd been tricked into thinking that Isabel was like the reincarnation of his lost love. But of course, who was like once a touchstone back in the day. But of course, because Isabel was a vampire, and also Isabel was not the reincarnation of his lost love, she just happened to look a little bit like her, it wasn't helping his soul in any fashion. But Enolf kind of believed that it did. But when things like Drogo died in the duel and things like that, it meant that Enolf began to slide further down, kind of down the...
What did we make Catherine's? Oh, she's servants, of course.
Yeah.
Like Wallace Light. So
one of the things, actually, the note on Catherine about her appearing after the time jump, because I was quite keen, when we had the 10-year time skip, that the players not be the youngest kindred anymore. That they would be now neonates, and there will be new fledglings or younger neonates who'd come into the city, so they would feel something about that.
Yeah. In fact, why don't I just hang on. No. I move us over here, and then that's so much better. Well done, me.
What about the La Sombra? Well, there are no La Sombra in Oxfordshire, as you know. There's only Ventru and Ventru, and that's it. That's all we have.
Yeah. So the wonderful thing about Theodore being a La Sombra is that when we started the Chronicle, we didn't know that he was a La Sombra.
Yeah, in the very, very, very beginning. Well, no, not so much by the time, because there was a point when, obviously, Onyx Path brought the La Sombra out in, I think, Chicago by Night.
Yes.
And that was all happening around the start of the Chronicle. So it kind of evoked like there was a point where I was like, "Hey, Mitch, I've got this crazy idea."
Well, no. What happened is that Carlos fell in love with the La Sombra in Chicago by Night, and day in day out was like, "Hey, you should make me a La Sombra," and we were like, "No, we're not making you a La Sombra." And he was like, "Yeah, but what if you made me a La Sombra?" And we were like, "No, Carlos."
Yeah.
And then I distinctly remember one day that Carlos had left for work. He just looked at me and he went, "I've got a crazy idea, Mitch. What if we make Theodore La Sombra?" And
the rest was history.
And the rest was history. So you can even see, that there was kind of a hangover that like Isabel has a Ventru Bane here.
Yeah. But the other thing was, of course, that to be Ventru, they had to pretend they had Ventru Banes.
Yes.
They had to act like Ventru.
Yeah. Carlos totally social combated. Yeah.
Yeah, he did. One of my arguments for Mitch was, but think how happy it would make Carlos. Just imagine his face when he finds out, and that was one of the clinchers. So.
Which is a very compelling argument.
Yes, Theodore was 9th generation, and the rest of the coterie were 10th generation.
Yes, that's right.
Because of that.
But we had some other low humanity vampires. So Francis, of course.
Yeah,
Humanity 2.
Yes.
She was kind of hanging on the strings of her loyalty to the prince.
Yeah, it was all about Drogo for her.
And her poor child, which the story didn't really come much into it, but we saw a little bit of it. So Matthew Smith was kind of an old touchstone of hers that got cancer, and that she couldn't face the idea of him dying, so she embraced him, which of course flew her down.
Yeah, it was like, have all of the stains, Sir Francis. That ruins your touchstone, and it also means your touchstone doesn't work, and you've got low humanity. So it was good.
Yeah, but he was basically like her possession.
Yeah.
Like he
had a rough time. There were lots of people who had rough times.
So I'm quite happy that he managed to get out.
Yeah, I was pleased. So should we do Toreador Banes actually?
Oh yeah.
Because they're quite fun too. That was the other.
The Malkavians.
And then we did the Melks as well. Yeah. So Alistair's, no surprise, high Gothic aesthetic.
Yeah.
That was, I think, fairly clear. Then we had Barnaby, who had things with the inner workings exposed.
Yeah. So if you look back at some of the scenes that he was in, he would often get distracted. Like I think Silas was working on a car at some point, and he got a bit distracted by that. And
yeah, when he could see the exposed engine, that was a kind of a cool thing for him. He liked being in spaces where you could see, like if you were inside a factory and you could see all these pipes and the inner workings, then he was a big fan of that. Mm-hmm. There was also the thing with the pillow when he started pulling all the fluff out of the pillow because he was nervous and stuff like that. That came up.
Yeah, that's cool.
Obviously, Joanne's was about clinical spaces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Kelly, who was not in the bloodline, but was the other Toreador, hers was all about kind of stage spaces and performance spaces and very well lit spaces, where you could be the centre of attention.
Yes.
And like places with like good acoustics and that kind of thing. And obviously we had some Toreador as well in the 1962 one, which I think are worth a mention here, because they are cool ones as well.
Yeah.
So there was Marjorie, who I quite liked because it wasn't an indoor kind of space or a man-made space. It was about, because she was a stargazer, and it was all about the night sky and being outdoors.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really cool. And we had Leona's, which was like, if I recall correctly, was kind of like bright, kind of poppy 60s, vibrant,
like very colourful, like nice places.
And then Chester, who it had to be spaces where you could be yourself, where you could let down your kind of social mask and be yourself.
His pain was to destroy my beautiful furniture.
And obviously Thomas's was kind of like court spaces and like old school nightly environments.
Yes.
Like if he was in a jousting ring, or he was at a medieval feast, or in a king's court, fine. But otherwise, it was no good. And I loved all that kind of the way that fed into the characters.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, let's do the Melks. Let's do the
Melks.
Favourite.
So the Melks, I love the Malkavian Banes that we have in this city. Let's start from the bottom. Denton, what was his? I don't know. He was just a dick, really, wasn't he?
I might have made a really sarcastic comment, like Denton genuinely believed in the Tory party or something. I can't remember. I don't think it was a fully serious bane for him that would impact his. He certainly believed in his own kind of superiority. Sally's, though.
Sally's is that, as you can see, she is always right.
Yeah.
Always.
She is always right. And that obviously impacted with her, that if anybody disagreed with her, she had to argue with them. Or at least she might let it go, but in her mind she was like, yeah, but I was right. Yeah. And so that was always a thing.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter, of course, if they were an elder or not. But also, if she was then proven right, she had to point it out. Because other people had to appreciate that she was right as well.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of fun.
I mean, I think it was one of the great surprises of the Chronicle that Sally did not get killed by.
Yeah, we thought Sally. We were certain Sally was going to die, and the coterie saved her at least twice from herself. Really, from herself. Yeah, that was great.
So we had Gareth Thomas, that the boonkeeper that we saw a little bit of towards the end of the series. And his thing was that he believed his soul would start to kind of break apart if he was alone.
Yeah.
Which is, of course, why he did not want to sleep alone after seeing the horrible, horrible Bowman.
It also made him a bit different to most kindred in that he always wanted to be with other people and hang out with them. And of course, because he had this weird status in the city, he always was staying with other kindred. In fact, one of the plots that we talked about doing, but we never had time to do, was the plot where Gareth just turns up and says, "Hi, I've come to stay with you all for a bit." At some inopportune moment where the coterie are burying bodies and things. But sadly, it never got to be. And yes, he did just want a friend. He did not have any friends, sadly.
No.
Because most people didn't respect, whilst they respected his office, the fact that he was a vampire with his fangs plucked meant they just did not respect him.
Oh yeah, he was the worst ancilla.
Oh yeah, that was
the worst ancilla.
So we've got his character sheet.
We do. Shall we have a look at
Yeah, and when I was saying to Mitch about, I should add, because I'm a lazy Ventru storyteller basically, and Mitch was like, "Do you want me to do his sheet?" And I was like, "Yeah, please." The brief was he's got to be the worst ancilla ever.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's kind of a pathetic specimen as far as ancilla go.
Yeah, but he's a good guest.
He is a good guest, and he knows a lot about history.
Yeah, that's about.
And he's reasonable at creeping about.
Yeah, so that he can, not bother his hosts and just have a nice time.
Yes.
So we had that, and then
the pièce de résistance, your favourite.
The best Malkavian Bane in the world, Sir Gansuk. 3s, good. 4s, bad. 12s.
You don't talk about 12s.
Catastrophic. And that was it. So one of my favourite things about this chronicle was that. So Gansuk obviously is an Malkavian, has all specs, has premonition and things like that. So he would often kind of know hints of things that other characters didn't yet know, and would try to dispense that wisdom, or be in the right place at the right time, or give help when he thought it was needed. But then sometimes it was not wisdom; it was just because there was 4 of the thing, and he did not like it.
Yeah, and it could have been any, I think there's a. So Phil's just mentioning about did we save Sally twice? So I think one time was because there was the whole. They kind of saved her socially because there was the whole thing where she wanted to have a duel with Rupert over supposed poaching, and Rafe was like, just make this go away. I don't want this being a mess with my child, all that kind of stuff. And there could have been a whole heap of animosity and trouble, but the coterie stepped in and kind of negotiated and made it all okay and made that go away. And then there was a point where Denton tried to frame Sally, because obviously Denton was Sally's child. Denton tried to frame Sally to get her punished and meet final death. But the coterie uncovered the fact that it was Denton's doing and then spoke on her behalf in front of the prince, and therefore she didn't get horribly punished.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, if nothing else in this chronicle, the coterie saved Sally.
Yes, they did.
It's an unquestionable achievement.
So I'm not sure if there's much more.
No, I don't know if there's anything radical we need to talk about there.
To add, we did have this little line of Nosferatu that Mr. Whispers was, which I quite like the Nosferatu Banes as well that we had, but obviously you've seen those because they're
visual.
They're visual on the outside.
But yeah, one of the things as well was because the prince was a Nosferatu, And Sir Francis, obviously, we wanted some kind of classic Nosferatu as well, who just did Nosferatu things. And we also wanted this sense of kind of, this two-tier class system of, well, are you related in some way to a knight, or do you hold office in the city? And that puts you at a certain tier, and then for everybody else, you're just sort of a bit scummy. So you also have people like Brick. Yeah, so I see a comment here, which I kind of want... Oh, two things to address. So Nico's asking, why did Silas get kidnapped by the horse? So there was a thing in season 1 when Sir Gansuk was testing Silas. Because Silas, way back when there was like the whole presenting to the prince and things, Silas talked about how skilled he was and how he could be helpful. And he kind of succeeded at a cost. So the cost was that Sir Gansuk threw javelins at him on a horse. But actually Silas did a remarkably good job of not getting murdered by javelins. And so Sir Gansuk was like, that's pretty cool. So then he was like, I'm going to test Silas 3 times. Because obviously 3's are good.
Because it's got to be 3.
It's got to be 3.
3 tests.
So one of the tests was all about blacking out one of the streets. Because, and this sort of segues, well, I don't know if we'll quite get there, into another saucy plot we never got to. Ooh, you're in for a treat, people. But yeah, there was a whole thing. He had a premonition about Joanne being under threat in this area, and so he thought that if there was a blacked out street, it would enable her to hide or get away.
Yes.
So he had Silas knock out all of the lights. Now, of course, actually that didn't matter in the end because Joanne went a different way. But that's the thing about premonition; you can't predict everything. But it meant that Silas, nevertheless, had passed that test. And then the third test was about getting back alive from the outskirts of Oxfordshire, which was why his horse took Silas off to the... what's it called? Where the stones are.
The
King's... it's the... Anyway.
The King's Stones.
The King's Stones. Like it's all very cool and appropriate. But yeah, that's why the horse did that.
Yeah. So Gansuk's whole thing with that test was the horse will take him out there, and like close to dawn.
Yeah.
And if he makes it back
to court,
if he makes it back to court, then I'll speak for him.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't,
then he's toast.
He's failed his test.
Yeah.
But I think we did have a bit of an idea that maybe that wasn't the first time Gansuk had done something like that. And it also led... King's Barrow, yeah.
Yes, thank you, yes. So it also led to some nice stuff, like after the first season, when the players got various kind of free bonuses for their age, as well as XP to spend. But they also got kind of deals based on the actions that they took in the Chronicle.
Yeah.
So in Silas's case, it was like, well, you can have Sir Gansuk as a mauler if you want, because you've done all these things to please him. But also, it's Sir Gansuk, so you can get him on the cheap, because he's not really... it's not quite the same as having a normal elder as a mauler. And of course, he took him up, so that was a thing.
I think we did also offer that to Lane with Sally.
Yes, so Joanne took Sally as a mauler as well.
Yeah. Although Sally as a mauler, I don't know.
I know, it's a bit...
Maybe more of a flaw.
It's a bit of a... Yeah, it's a bit of a 50-50. So there was a thing I just want to touch on... about we never saw Mr. Whispers. We never saw what Mr. Whispers looked like.
Yeah.
Now, one of the scenes that I wanted to do in session 10, but I didn't get the time to do, was like an epilogue-y scene where Mr. Whispers and Silas were on a date. And that things had got to the point where she was ready to show him her face, and so she's only got a low bane severity. So I mean, obviously she's repulsive because she's in Nosferatu, but spiritually speaking, she's only a little bit away from looking like a human being. Still enough to put the willies up you, but it's only a little bit. Not like people like Sir William, who are just obviously corpses and freaky. But one of the things that I was going to do, because obviously I'm a storyteller and I have to be horrible to my players, was I was going to make Silas make a composure and subterfuge roll to not to see whether he's repulsed by Mr. Whisper's face or not, because he is on the level of his soul. I'm sorry, those of you who think Nosferatu are hot. Because I think the thing is, that people can find beauty in almost anything, So if you're a regular vampire with repulsive, you can still get around that. Love is blind and all that. But if it's a Nosferatu, their bane actually makes you inhuman. Yeah, I'm sure we will argue about it later. That bane makes you inhuman. So the role that Silas will be making is not whether he finds her appealing or not, but whether he can hide that revulsion from his face when he first sees her. And it was also going to be a kind of an interesting dilemma for Silas about, because she was obviously she's very shy about her bane, but she would also want some kind of encouragement. And then it's like, well, do you lie to her face? Do you genuinely say how you feel? How do you... It's a horrible minefield with no good results. So I was all for it.
As was I.
But sadly, we didn't get time. So that's, these things that happen. But yes, sorry. I mean, I would say that Velvet's investment in a motorcycle would probably have paid off from the point of view that Silas and Mr. Whispers may well have ended up as an item in the future. Well, I guess we will never know. You can put it in the fanfic. Have it happen whatever way you want. In the fanfic, he can find her attractive. How about that?
What did Mr. Whispers look like? So I sneakily showed it on screen a second ago, but maybe you didn't catch it.
So one of the things about this particular line of Nosferatu, was that they started becoming more kind of bug-like. So Fabrice, who was Mr. Whispers' sire, had these like long hairs, almost like spider legs all over his body, that he would always be scratching and they would fall off and like leave little trails around. Yeah, and he had his eyes were too far apart and he had quite big eyes. Pascal was like definitely leaning into full-on bug eyes, and he had like insect eggs and things under his skin. He was like, because obviously he'd gone that route where he could animalism insects and things around him and stuff like that. Yeah. Whereas Mr. Whispers just had, her eyes were just kind of bulbous, but still just about within the realm of humanness, right?
Yes, Pascal did buy you a cake.
Pascal did buy you a cake, Velvet, and yes, health and safety would be freaked out. There was probably a few hairs in that cake.
Probably, yeah.
So that was that thing. But should we talk about one of the super juicy plots we never got time to do?
Yeah, let's talk about one of the super juicy plots that we never got time to do. This is I did have a slight agenda for this.
Sorry, I might have ruined it.
It's been decimated. So
I'm like that.
We're now in the realms of chaos.
I'm a little bit like that Patrick Stewart gif where he's giggling like a naughty child, Because the thing is that obviously normally I have to keep an agenda, but today I'm just ruin the agenda. That's my job. It's great.
Yeah.
So one of the things we had in mind was that Tamesis obviously is set in the same world as Thames, and that it would be kind of nice if there was a little bit of crossover. So obviously, like Plucky Jake had a cameo in the games in season 2, but he was not the SPC that I really wanted to use. So the SPC, for those of you who've watched Blood on the Thames, the SPC that I really, really wanted to play with was Maisie Fitcher, who was a mortal who was Darren Fitcher's child. Darren Fitcher was like a dodgy wrong-un who the coterie in Thames brushed up against. But his daughter also made an appearance. He was not a nice man. He was not particularly nice to his daughter. But Darren Fitcher learnt about vampires.
Yeah,
and and at the end of the chronicle, Darren Fitcher was killed whilst trying to fight vampires effectively. But I figured that Maisie would also know about vampires existing, and also specifically the kind of disaster coterie of Blood on the Thames existing. And so I had it in mind that she would become like a hunter. And so she was basically looking into anything that looked suspicious and looking for signs of vampire activity. So, for example, when Joanne was embraced, her embrace happened with this kind of horrible rampage where Denton charged through a hospital, killing people, going crazy. And it was all covered up by Sally, but it was nevertheless it was such a mess that she couldn't cover it perfectly. And anyway, she Maisie, that is, got wind of this and started investigating. And by the time we'd done our 10-year time skip, Maisie is now actually quite an experienced hunter. Now, she's not fully connected to like the serious Second Inquisition, but she's starting to find other people that believe in this stuff, and she's starting to basically investigate and hunt down vampires. Mm-hmm. So one of the things in season 1 was that Maisie was pretty convinced Joanne was a vampire, but she wanted to prove it. And that's why it was Maisie and not Anne who drove a car and did a hit and run on Joanne in season 1. So that's why there was someone who seemed like short behind the wheel, because Maisie was only, was still young herself. She basically nicked the car and then did a drive-by.
Yeah, it was basically like, I'm going to hit this vampire with a car, and if they get up, then I know they're a vampire. It's a simple litmus test to see, is weird stuff going on here.
And back in like the original plan for Tamesis, back when I had no concept of time, and I was like, of course we'll fill this stuff in, it'd be easy. Season 1 was always going to be around the coterie establishing themselves and about how well they did that. So we have the whole gambling mechanic for coterie points, and the thing of them having to prove themselves and kind of earn their status. And then season 2 was going to be about them in the city and the kind of the politics and various things going on. And then season 3 was going to be all about the Second Inquisition.
Yeah.
How we laugh now.
So I want to point out, Elthanes is saying that he thought it was someone that Denton mesmerized, which, of course, at this point, Denton couldn't have done, because he was locked in Sally's basement.
Yeah. Yeah, so Denton was locked in Sally's basement, and we kind of met him kind of mid-season. But then, because Sally failed that kind of frenzy role in court, and got put in torpor by Sir Francis and whisked out of court, she was then not around for a while, which gave Denton time to escape from the basement. And then in the time jump between season 1 and 2, Denton was able to find a little base of operations, get himself moving, and plot his revenge against Sally, which was then what he, of course, initiated in season 2. So one of the other things to say whilst we're talking about Second Inquisition things was that one of the people that Maisie had made contact with was Noah Breslaw, who was Joanne's touchstone around Monsters Must Die. Mm-hmm. And by the end of the Chronicle, through Noah, there was a contact with Bridget McAllister, who didn't know about vampires until such time as Theodore scared the living hell out of her and was like supernaturally terrifying. And she started to realise that there was, a bit more to this, because she was also an investigator and someone who had a strong sense of justice. And one of the possible plots, we had a point in, I think, season 3, where Noah was like, okay, kill Jeffrey. And what this was about was they figured out that Joanne was a vampire. And Maisie was very much of the opinion that means that Joanne should die, right? Because she's a vampire. But McAllister and Noah were like, no, she's a good she's not quite like them. She's just as in for justice as we are. So they were like, well, okay, give her a test. And you don't want to send her up against someone too scary, because then she might die. And that's no use to you. So who is, how can you test that she's loyal but also not put her under too much threat? Well, Jeffrey's the perfect soft target.
Jeffrey, the second surprise survival of the Chronicle.
Yeah, I was certain Jeffrey was a goner. I thought he was going to die for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, one of the weird things about this, of course, was we were always trying to say, well, there's lots of ways this can go, and what are the possible options, But yeah, one of the options was that Joanne could have become like an agent for the Inquisition and been, infiltrating court and.
Yeah. I mean, like, not, under threat of death.
I mean, obviously they would not trust her, and obviously there'd always be that threat of, are they going to turn on her, and etc., and it would be like a really difficult thing, but that was always a possibility.
Yes, a filthy Second Inquisition mole.
Yes.
So we did actually have an SPC that was first going to be.
Oh yeah, We had a mole for the Second Inquisition.
Yeah, we did. Ooh. But as time went on, we sort of decided that
There just wasn't.
yeah,
It was again. It was. We started off with like a
could just be
massive buffet of things of vampires, and then as the players chose which dishes they wanted to kind of get involved with, we would then focus on those. But interestingly, that kindred ultimately became Barnaby's mum.
Yes.
Because we wanted someone who had basically come into the city, not knowing any of the rules, blundered in, got into trouble, and been put in the freezer. So that was kind of how that story evolved. I wonder though if it's time, because we don't want to run out of time. I wonder if we should jump to a really juicy thing.
Yes.
Oh, but actually, no. Before we do, there's another plot, because we were talking about plots we didn't do. There is one other plot I absolutely want to talk about.
Yes.
This is the story that involves Silas's hat. So when Silas was created, he took a bane about white animals. So of course, Mitch and I were immediately like, we need to bring white animals into this chronicle as often as possible, like at every opportunity. And as you will know, Sir Gansuk's horse was white, because obviously that's hilarious, right? But there was also in Silas's prelude a white cat that turned up and sort of sat on his car and got in his way and was a bit weird. So this was a plot line that we didn't ultimately explore, but I always had it in mind that when Silas picked up his hat, he'd like picked it up from like a secondhand store or something, and that this hat belonged to someone who'd been murdered and had now become a wraith. And the wraith was possessing the cat, which was their cat, when they were alive, and trying to draw people's attention to the murder, to get someone to investigate their death. And of course, because Silas had one of their fetters, because the hat was one of their things that bound them to the world, it was much easier for them to find Silas if he was anywhere in the vicinity of that flat. So they were. So that's why.
So we're gonna have sort of this like spooky white cat that would be trying to get his attention and like maybe intervene sometimes to stop him going to dangerous places so that he can stay alive and do this investigation and things.
But we just didn't have time.
There was just never time.
There was a running joke where I would often tell Mitch the scenes I had planned for a session, and he would say, "There are too many scenes, Peter," and I'd be like, "Oh, it'll be okay." It was never okay. It was never okay, ever.
Yeah. So to give you an idea of just the extent of this, the duel between Drogo and Helena was originally supposed to happen halfway through season 2.
Yeah, it was in episode 5.
It was in episode 5. And then it was episode 9 that it happened. It was at the end of that season, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was at the end. I think it might have been episode 10 actually.
Yeah. So the exciting thing.
Oh yeah, let's do the exciting thing
that Peter alluded to. Is that obviously Peter is the storyteller, and I was the secret storyteller, but there was a third.
There was
greater and far more significant storyteller.
Yeah, an over storyteller.
Greater than the two of us combined.
Yeah.
Which was, of course, all of you. Well, maybe not all of you, because there are some other players here, but. Yes, so one of the things that we do, which I'm sure you all know, is that all of our supporters on Twitch and on Patreon can take part in, what's it called? No, or was it Kane?
Was it Kane? No, it's more important than Kane.
More important than Kane.
Greater than Kane.
all of our supporters, we have a bi-weekly vote that we do on our Discord, which they can vote in, and the most votes is obviously what happens. So every 2 weeks we ask a question about something that might happen, and they will give us an answer.
Now, and I'm very pleased to see that Lane is saying, but what are some of these things? Well, Mitch has got a treat for you, because whilst the Chronicle's over, he still has to work in a cupboard until this session is over.
How big should we be? This big?
We can be as big as you want, Mitch. I don't mind. Let's see how it looks when the thing is there.
So obviously everything is. No, I should show it.
I think you should show it. Show them your masterpiece.
So this is a lovely little flowchart that I've been putting together that follows all of the votes and their results and the things, or the main things that came from them. Because one thing that I realized as I was doing it is that actually there are many different, like there are so many kind of
options, possibilities.
What's the word? Like outcomes. Like
yeah.
There's so many ways that these votes have actually affected.
Yes.
The course of the Chronicle, and some of them have been in very small ways,
and some in big.
Some of them have been big. So
this is as much for the players as well as the rest of you, but we want to talk about it, and also just to give you an idea of what kind of impact these votes had on the story, because some of them were massive and some, as you say, were kind of small.
Yes. So we may not go through all of them because there's
a lot,
quite a lot. But there are some sort of some smaller stuff like this. So the first vote really kind of, the fact that the Thin Bloods survived this, is one of the things that let Joanne continue to interact with them, because one of the options was just murder them all. Yeah,
because one of them was actually leave them as a warning to others, make an example of them, which would have been a very different, a much more ruthless beginning rather than the branding. And obviously that whole sequence led to us first seeing Theodore being a puppy at home and not a puppy at work.
Yes. Which I think did define a lot about how the Coterie interacted at the start of the Chronicle.
Yeah, and it set up Joanne's relationship, as you say, with the Thin Bloods, and of course, Silas, Canine Slayer. So
we sort of moved on from that, and all of the players had to make their presentations.
Yeah, to the Prince, and the Prince would ask each one of them a question.
Yes. And actually we voted on the question for each of the players. I haven't included all of them here because some of them had more significant effects than others. Some of them just had like a little bit of like RP flavour. But Joanne, for example, said that she would totally
atone for the sins of her clan, which obviously was the seed for a longer plot line later on in the Chronicle.
Yeah. And of course, Silas's answer gave way to the greatest neonate elder relationship of all time.
Yeah. How will you best serve the Prince? Well, I'm really good at fighting and dodging things and stuff. Awesome. We've got a thing for you.
We've got a job for you. So let's move on to. Well, no, this is the first and I think most significant vote.
Yeah.
Of the entire Chronicle, because this really started a whole chain of events.
Basically shaped everything.
Yeah, basically shaped everything. Like, this was not something that I think, like we had no idea that this thing about, Oxford encroaching on another domain and we had no idea that was going to be
such a feature, and that the Coterie would be so involved in it, because there were a number of options around, because actually the vote was around what does Sir Francis do, because she shamed herself in court, so how is she going to deal with it? And one of the options was that she was going to deal with it by doing horrible things to the people she thought had shamed her.
Yes.
So whilst we often say what monsters chat are in terms of how they treat the players, they were actually very kind. They were benevolent, one might say, on this occasion, and kind of enabled this whole plot line to kick off. And that was all the kind of Robert Weston stuff, which was huge.
Yeah. So as you can see in this tiny line, so this little thing really kind of spawned a whole chain of things that went right to the end of the Chronicle. Because, of course, him being given the opportunity to help out with Robert Weston led to them breaking the rules of domain.
Yeah, it led to the whole coterie also pooling together and staking their reputations on the act as well.
Yes, which then led to, all of the stuff of like Helena's challenge to Drogo, and then the duel, and then Drogo dying, and then the whole kind of the whole kind of outcome of that, and the whole effect of that on the city.
Can we?
Yes.
I'm not sure which vote it is, but there was one vote in particular I wanted to talk about, just because there's a meme that I love. I think Hidda might have made it. I don't know, but it's the one where you have all of the chat looking like they're really pleased with themselves because they come up with a demonic idea to expose the players to, and then they watch the results of that decision play out, and then they're all horrified and like, I can't bear to look, and why did we do this?
Yeah.
And I can't remember which vote it was, but the reason I want to talk about this is because chat does have a line. We found out what the one thing that was sacred to chat they wouldn't hurt was.
Yes. So, actually, unfortunately, the vote that you're talking about is the one vote that I've not included on this flowchart.
That's fine. I can talk about it, or you can talk about it.
So it was a vote about, it was when Naoto was in town, and we were thinking, okay, how is Naruto going to mess with Theodore and ruin his day because they hate each other? And one of the options on that vote was that Naruto would go to Pascal and use him to find Miyuki. And chat were having none of it.
Yeah, they were like, don't touch Miyuki.
Don't you dare touch our precious little Miyuki. How much underlying effect did Joanne's betrayal have, not just against Drogo?
I mean, obviously, Drogo was the prime beneficiary of that betrayal. But it had a number of effects, because obviously, when Drogo fell, he was... So I should take a step back and say one of the kind of key ideas behind the whole Chronicle was that Oxfordshire is a domain in decay. It is a broken domain, right? That when Thomas... Well, I would say when Thomas leaves, but even before then, when Drogo basically acts in a dishonourable way against the Tremere, that starts the rot in Oxfordshire and starts the kind of the break between the two of them. And then when Thomas gets the beckoning and leaves and effectively breaks the oath, he also, of course, breaks Drogo's heart, and basically the city then starts to collapse because the key pillars are no longer holding it up. But when Drogo actually dies, then that has a cascade of effects. So, for example, Sir Francis's humanity immediately then drops, which triggers her going after the Toreador.
As did Enolf's.
Enolf's humanity also dropped, which meant he got more fixated on things. So that was another interesting thing, actually, which was that when that all happened, Velvet did this whole thing where he was going to, like... He kind of talked to Enolf to calm him down and prayed with him. So he got Enolf's attention. Mm. And then there was a scene between them where Velvet talked about the importance of love above everything. Because Enolf was like, oh, I'm not quite sure what to do. And Velvet had this conversation, and that's what made Enolf not go on the fight with Amargo.
Yes, but the only reason that happened is that there was a little collaboration there between Bex and Chat, because that was one of the things that Chat actually voted on later on, was about Enolf, and that when he'd lost everything, what would be the one thing that he managed to hold on to? So we talked earlier about his love for Isabel, about his hate of the Sabbat, and about his loyalty to the Oath.
Yes, yeah.
And those were the options for this vote, but Chat chose that it would be his obsession over Isabel.
Yeah.
That would, be the last surviving fragment of his soul.
Yes.
And so actually them doing that and that idea about the love that he has for Isabel is what...
It opened a door when Velvet was saying those
Yes.
things where Enolf was like, okay, yeah, this is the thing I'm going to... And also why I think when Enolf catches them all in his haven and Velvet is like, well, I was protecting the one I loved. Enolf was like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
but the rest of you are in real trouble.
Yes.
Because, so that was kind of partly how that worked out.
Yeah. So
I think those are
some of the big votes for sure. We had some stuff around Denton about what Denton would be doing.
Yeah, back in season 2, how was Denton going to get his revenge on Sally, and what was he going to get involved in?
And chat also opened the door to that happening.
Yeah.
Because when Sally and Rupert were not getting along, and Sally was using her bane to full effect, they were arguing in court, and the coterie decided they would resolve this in a civil matter, right? But then chat decided that somebody in the city wouldn't like the fact that fledglings were solving ancillary problems.
Yeah, so the players obviously resolved that situation between those kindred, but then what we allowed chat to decide was, how does the court view this? You know, do they say, wow, what promising fledglings, how amazing, they've sorted this out? Or do they say, wow, these ancilla are rubbish? Or do they say, you know, like, what is the court take on it? And of course, the court take was a little bit in the middle, like, well done, fledglings, shame on you, ancilla. And that, of course, provided immediate stains to those SPCs and led to...
But also made them frenzy.
Yeah, also made them frenzy.
Because they were humiliated in front of everybody.
Yeah.
Which led to Sally being...
Yeah, because...
disappeared by the skirt, just taken away.
Because Velvet bought Rupert a little bit of time, or kind of assist him to... Although he was on the path to losing it. But then Sir William basically ended that frenzy.
Yeah.
Whereas nobody did that for Sally, who came screaming across the court, and then Sir Francis, of course, just took her out.
I mean, nobody's going to do that for Sally. So obviously, the fact that Sally was then not around for a while is what gave Denton a chance to escape, because she was not there dominating him to hell. And then, you know, because the coterie went to deal with Robert Weston because they were given the opportunity, then Theodore got Vance, and Vance caught Denton trying to
get in,
trying to investigate their haven. So there's like this wonderful like cascading effect of different things that...
So one of my pet peeves as a player is when you invest in things like security and then it doesn't seem to make any difference. Now, obviously, sometimes, you know, powerful elder vampires will stroll past your security, and that, of course, is just a thing. But I think it can be a bit frustrating. And one of the things that was nice was because the coterie had been so successful in season 1, they had like a 3-dot haven, they had watchmen, they had all kinds of security stuff, as well as, of course, very nice cushions and things like that. But, you know, it meant that when other kindred, like, so for example, when Maisie was trying to track down Joanne, she couldn't do it whenever they were in the haven. She couldn't get near it. So it was only when, and also Joanne tended to stay in the haven a lot. So things like that I kind of liked because it felt good.
Sorry, I think Phil has just seen this little photo up here about about how you would be sabotaged.
Oh yes, yes, that was a great vote. Yeah, so I should say, Phil, we of course would never have dreamed of having you brutalised with dementation just before the games, along with Jeffrey. but yeah, chat voted for it, so that was. Oh, now the thing you might have to tell the story of Vance's name because I am old, and this happened like before yesterday. But there was a lovely story. Now you've mentioned, I do remember it. happening, but give me a detail and I'll see if I can remember it. But yes, that was a great vote.
Yeah, but Silas obviously, with being the wonderful neonate.
Yeah, he didn't need willpower to win that game.
He didn't need willpower.
He was fine. But that also led on to things, because it meant that Silas actually was on aggravated willpower, had been seriously depleted by experience for quite a lot then of the rest of Season 2 and the start of Season 3. So it affected him and the way he was quite a lot as well, which was very interesting.
I was talking about important votes earlier, and I can't believe I missed out this one. Because chat are actually the ones that decided that there would be a duel between Helena and Drogo. So some of the other options for that were about sending those that were responsible for the breach of domain to Helena to answer for their actions.
Oh yeah, so there was she'll ask them to throw the coterie under the bus. Basically.
There was about Prince Drogo going and explaining why he's failed as a prince and how he could let this happen. I think there was something as well about Drogo giving Helena a boon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there were lots of different options of the way it could go. So that was a cool one.
But the duel, obviously.
Yeah, it was huge. Was huge.
You know, defined the whole of Season 3, basically.
Yeah, so that was one that when we created the domain and coming up with the Chronicle, I wanted a situation where, although the players, of course, are neonates rather than, Ancilla or Elders, I wanted a place where still they could affect the story and they could make things happen and they could change the politics. Because, whilst they might not be the people running the city, they could persuade the people running the city, or they could persuade the people who could persuade the people, as long as they worked hard enough for it.
Sorry, I've just seen this and I've been reminded of something that we should definitely share. So, obviously, there was this awesome duel between Drogo and Amargo, between two elder, old school warriors from different parts of the world, which was really cool. But we did actually sit there and roll out this combat between two proper elders with their massive dice pools. Because that's worth saying actually. There were a lot of things, because it's a stream and not a regular role-playing game, I didn't want to have massive swathes of time taken up with dice rolling, particularly if it was between SPCs. But I also didn't just want to make a snap call on it, because the interesting thing about Amargo and Drogo is either could have won. So there was always that thing about what, that we weren't controlling entirely the results of things that went on. So it took us ages actually. Yeah, it did take us a while.
Because they had a lot of dice and there was a lot of counting. And of course they could do things like heal between times and they had massive pools and damage reduction and various other things.
But definitely one thing that we learned during that fight was that in the battle between Potence and Fortitude in V5, Fortitude is far, far superior because Amargo just did not care. He was taking all this damage, but then just getting stronger and stronger from it. Because of course he had
prowess and pain. So it was one of those things where in the end Drogo had to rouse to match his pool. Just to match him, and also the other thing we learned actually was the hunger was the big decider.
Yes. Because
you're really great as long as you can rouse to use your abilities, but the moment you can't do that anymore against an equal opponent, you're in real trouble.
Yeah. So, but there was the strike that ended that fight.
Oh yeah.
Because Drogo sort of had a chance. By the end of the fight, he was in frenzy.
And we had house rules, and of course he got his Bane severity onto all of his physicals, so he was pretty ludicrous at that point.
He was not using his weapon anymore, so Fist of Cain was he could probably use it.
Yeah, so he could start to really tear, which is why could start tearing chunks off Amargo.
Yeah. But then Amargo, we rolled his dice pool, and he got. Was it 4 10s?
He looked like double crit win.
Yeah.
All the successes under the sun. It was like 17. I can't remember. It was something ridiculous.
It was like 18 successes, or it might have been over 20. I don't
It was
remember.
insane.
It was absurd. So we were like, okay. Each officer's
That's
that
that is the end of it. But yeah, that could have gone either way. And we also rolled out quite a few other things. And one of the most complicated things we did was the end of season 1 with the Knights riding out, where it was like, working out what everybody did, and also because we didn't know what the players would do. So, for example, there was a chance that the players had said, actually, Robert Weston's a pretty reasonable bloke. Mm-hmm. We're not going to sell him out. Or there was a chance that they would just fail to persuade him, or that he would realise they were trying to trick him, or whatever. But yeah, we had all these different options for how things would happen, and if then that happened, we took like the most likely ones and then rolled those out to see what would go on. So
I think this little flowchart that I've done, I will be putting onto the Discord, and I don't know, maybe we can find a way to get it onto the website or something.
Yeah, definitely. We will put some of this stuff up so you can peruse it at your leisure.
Because I do think that is a really, really cool thing, actually, and that I really enjoyed the way that the audience could impact the story.
Yeah, me too.
Votes. Because it's something interesting and something unique that we can do because of
the stream. Yeah,
because of the stream and the format that we're doing.
Also, I mean, the other thing on that front, as well as the influence from chat, I also really liked the way the players changed the story. So things like, not only the Robert Weston thing that happened, which obviously came from chat and then the players ran with, but also Imago. Right, Imago wins the duel and leaves. He could have just left. That could have been that. Mm-hmm. But then Theodore was like, not on my watch. Right, and Silas was like, this is an outrage to Oxfordshire, we've got to do something. And then suddenly half the city was off, Yeah,
and there were some weird cases also where the votes and the players kind of came together and like without
they just sort of by osmosis it all worked out.
Yeah,
Sorry, I see a question about Drogo's humanity. I think it was humanity 2, wasn't he? Was he 3?
Is he 2 or 3? I don't know. Let me look at our little thing.
We've got a Kumu for that. 3.
He was 3.
I think he was 3 at the start and 2 by the end.
He was 3 at the start. We definitely threw him stains when he did things like Stake the Messenger and
Yeah.
But
I mean, obviously, he often would also break his own chronicle tenets, so his own oath, because
Yeah, although the great thing about being the Lord is that you cannot be untrue to yourself.
Yes, he couldn't be untrue to himself. That is true, but he could bring shame upon his blood, and he could serve the beast, which he did, of course, serve the beast.
So I was wondering if you had any sort of favourite moments from.
Oh my God! Always those kind of questions. I mean, I had loads of moments that I enjoyed, and I guess I'd put them in 2 categories. So there are definitely moments where I liked from the point of view of player interaction. Mm. Some of the scenes between the coterie where we kind of saw the deepening of the relationships, or points or where things turned, I really enjoyed. And I liked funny enough, one of the it's easy for me to say this because I can still remember it, but one of the scenes that I liked was the last coterie scene in episode 10, where it had come out that Theodore was a La Sombra, and there was obvious strong feelings on all sides.
Yeah.
And just kind of how that played, but also for a vampire game of, personal horror, it was actually kind of quite affirming and wholesome at the end.
Yeah.
This sort of sense that it drew them all close together, and I enjoyed that a lot.
Sorry, I see people in chat are talking about the Bowman.
Oh yeah, there is some. I wasn't sure whether to tease them at the end with that, but I can do it now, I guess. Should we talk about the Bowman?
I think we should talk about the Bowman. So the interesting thing about the Bowman is that obviously he's an SPC that we did not make.
Yeah, you can thank Amis for that.
You can thank Amis for that.
He was like, I know what will be fun. Let's create a diablerizing monster.
Yeah. And it was fun.
And it was fun. He was right.
But when was it? It was sort of around some point season 2, wasn't it? That we did the memoriams.
Yes, it was like it was just after season 2, I think, before season 2 and 3.
And I think that was also quite interesting because it was a way for, again, the audience to kind of influence what we were doing in the Chronicles, some of the characters in the history of the city, how some of those things went.
Yeah, so there
were a couple of characters from that we were considering bringing back.
Yes, so again, this was a time thing. But because we were remote, we were like, well, we could bring some of these characters back. So, for example, obviously from the 1960 whatever one, that Chester is still around. And obviously he's got a big fat chip on his shoulder. And when things started to become fragmented in Oxfordshire, it would have been a time for him to come and further fragment the pot and make a power play.
Yeah.
And
because Joanne at this point also had an ambition around, trying to kind of end the bloodline that made her, because she kind of hated the fact that they existed in the world.
And then a new elder of that bloodline would turn up and be like, "Hi," and so that would have been kind of a fun thing for her. So it was definitely on the agenda.
Yeah.
But it was just, the thing is, we were too busy blowing up helicopters, so we just didn't have time.
But
blowing off legs.
Since the memoriam where Amos played the Bowman, we had this idea that the Bowman was kind of like a scary story to tell fledglings.
Yeah.
Right? That like if they don't behave, then the Bowman will get them. And that somewhere he was kind of skulking around in the wilds and like in the shadows of the night and doing horrible things, because he's a fucking monster, isn't he?
So one of the things about the Bowman is the Bowman likes diablerizing people whenever he gets the chance, particularly if they're juicy and interesting. So by the time the players encounter him in season 3, he is quite he's quite an odd character in that he has quite a broad set of disciplines because he's been diablerizing all these people.
Yeah, shall we show them?
Yeah, why don't you show them his character sheet? But also, and his blood potency is pretty good as well. But the other thing about him, of course, is that his humanity has been plummeting down and down and down and down and down. So that when we get to the point where we meet him, he is on his last point of humanity. He's basically just a predatory monster. That's all that's left of him. And we didn't know whether the Bowman... Well, obviously, we thought it likely that the Bowman would destroy Helena without too much problem. But Helena wasn't a pushover either. And obviously the players could have, in theory, decided to back her up. If they'd said, okay, Helena, if you owe us life boons or major boons or whatever they chose to bargain. So we wanted it to be rolled out and possible that it could go either way. Anyway, the juicy... I don't know if you want to talk about the sheet at all, Mitch, or not, but before I get to the plot thing.
Yeah, we could talk about the sheet a bit, so... So the thing I think when I'm starting elders is that I think you can too easily fall into the trap of like, oh, I just give them 5 in everything that they want to do.
Yeah.
When actually I think that if you've got decent blood potency, if you've got a decent stat and skill, he's got 8 dice for brawl plus his potence plus blood plus feral weapons, like. Why would he ever need Brawl 5 when he's got all of that, right?
Yeah.
Like, there has to come a point where the Elder is just existing, using what they have, right? They're not going to want to learn forever.
Yeah, I think also as your humanity goes down, it becomes harder and harder to learn new things or do interesting things. So I see people sort of saying nice things about Helena. So the interesting thing about Helena was... when the Bruyere and the Gangrel declared Anarch, at the end of 2012, Helena would have declared Oxfordshire an anarch city. And Jasmine, the Northern Gatekeeper, would have also declared with her. But other people like Sir William would not. They would have declared Camarilla, and it would have put a different kind of pressure on the city, which would have been kind of fun.
Yeah, so no 5 impotents, Elthanes. I thought, like, if he's diablerizing all the time, that he would have a kind of broader, but less deep kind of spread of disciplines.
So,
and I mean, like, you got potents for feral weapons. Who needs Fist of Cain?
The other thing to say is that he had been in torpor for a while.
Yes.
Yeah, that he's not just been like never-ending diablerie. He kind of does stuff and then goes to sleep and, you know, then pops up again and feeds on people. But anyway, the thing that I wanted to talk about that I thought was kind of fun, because it was affected by the players ultimately, was when the Bowman defeated Helena, there was a question mark about whether the players, because I knew that both Theodore and Silas would be kind of eyeing up the option for maybe finishing off the Bowman for glory. And if they would do this, because the Bowman was not going to diablerize anybody if he didn't think it was safe to do so. And he would have to retreat with Helena in order to do that. And it was just one of those things where Theodore made the attempt to hold on to him and it just didn't quite pan out that way. But had it done, then it would have been very different. They probably would have fought the Bowman, they probably would have killed the Bowman. No doubt they would have probably then given Helena final death as well, I assume, but I guess we'll never know. We'll find out in our dreams or in the fanfic. But in terms of what happened to the Bowman, what happened to the Bowman was this. The Bowman sunk away into the earth with Helena and then diablerized her. Mm-hmm. And the thing about diablerie is, if you lose all of your humanity, you get taken over by the person that you're diablerizing. They then take your body. And the problem the Bowman had was he lost his last humanity point before he made the roll. So what happened was Helena woke up in the Bowman's body and was very upset for quite some time.
Yeah.
But that ultimately Helena would return, but in the Bowman's body, to Oxfordshire.
And say, I brought you the Bowman's head.
And say, I brought you the Bowman's head, I passed the test.
Yeah.
That was ultimately what she would do.
Yes.
So
people are asking about the vampire in the coffin. So the thing about the Bowman is that the Bowman is a blood leech, which means that he cannot feed on mortals himself. And a good way to get around that is by having a hungry vampire locked in a coffin that you can let out to go feed itself whenever you're hungry, and then feed on it, and then drag it back into the cave in the coffin and lock it back up. And that was pretty much what the Bowman had been doing now for probably a couple 100 years. We don't really know who that vampire was. It didn't matter. They were all whites. They were just in perpetual hunger frenzy, basically.
They were ruined.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Yeah.
That was the Bowman. That was that thing.
That was the Bowman.
Oh, I think something we didn't. It's only a trivial detail, but Liam, who was the Malkavian, who was like the master of ceremonies in the games for Reading, when Reading got wind that like half of Oxfordshire were coming into the domain, this is when they were coming after Amalgo. Helena didn't have the strength. So it was, I think it came out in the story anyway, but it was true that pretty much what was said was the facts. So basically, way back in season 1, when the Knights come and trash Reading, the Second Inquisition are making their preparations to take London. So they're obviously very nearby. So when an absolutely apocalyptic level masquerade breach happens in Reading, the Second Inquisition start moving into Reading as well. And it had already been a thing in Blood on the Thames that the Nosferatu Warrens had been taken down. Because we kind of had like a mini scene play out in that told us about that. So Helena's position was extremely weak. And she couldn't afford to do anything. And she certainly couldn't afford to have a face-off in Reading with Oxfordshire Kindred. Because that would be final death for everybody, from her point of view. So what she did instead was she sent little David, the little Ventru, to the border in a just desperate attempt to try and persuade them not to do it. And Liam had the Auspex discipline, which enabled him to see through the eyes of another. Which was why Cheng Li made a reference to his eyes looking strange, because she had sensed the unseen. And, of course, David didn't persuade them, because Seth got bored, and frankly, Theodore was pretty bored as well. It was just a question of who got there first. But that's why Helena knew all about the breach of her border, because she'd heard they were coming, but also firsthand she got the report from Liam that David had been executed. So that was just a little detail I thought I'd throw in.
Yeah, there was another thing that we didn't get to do. So obviously we had to plan for the ending, all eventualities, right? So we had to plan, like, what if Helena wins? What if Helena dies? What if Helena dies but the coach would kill Bowman? Like, what are we going to do if all this stuff happens? So one of the things, obviously, was that Helena could pass the test and could go back and then have some ceremony, some nights after.
I remember this now.
Swearing her in to be prince. But we decided that obviously the big bad brouilleur himself, James Douglas, would not really be that convinced by Helena being prince.
Yeah.
And that he was going to do a good old Black Douglas, wasn't he? He was going to essentially kill all of the Reading kindred and put their heads on pikes on the steps as Helena was walking up to Elysium, as a message to her that he would be watching, basically.
Because although he'd said to Marta, I'm kind of retreating from all of this stuff, and he was ultimately going to go and have a sleep because he was pretty fed up with everything. He was still not actually, he hadn't really removed himself. He just got himself out of all of his responsibilities such that he could go and scare people. That was basically his plan. Echo is back.
Yeah, I think it's when you're talking, Peter.
Is it because I'm so loud it catches on your mic?
I think that is exactly what's happening.
I'll try and talk in a softer voice from now on.
But if I turn myself down, then people won't hear me.
Yeah, if you turn yourself down, you'll vanish. We can imagine that it is late night radio here with Mitch and Peter. Okay, so anything? I know I've ruined your agenda. I just tore it up and spat on it. But is there things on your agenda we've not covered? And obviously, if you have questions that we've not answered, this might be the time.
So people are asking about Sir Thomas and what happened to him, and were we considering bringing him back? Was he supposed to come back and we didn't get time? And the answer is no.
No.
He was never going to come back. He was gone.
Yeah, he was subject to the beckoning and it had taken him away.
Yes.
He was never going to come back.
And one of the things was about Drogo is that he was also getting the cause of the beckoning.
Yeah, so yes. So we sometimes had scenes where Drogo seemed distracted.
Yeah.
And it was because he had the call of the beckoning and it was getting harder and harder for him to resist. And it was also making him more likely to be irrational because, if you've ever experienced it where you've got like a headache or the equivalent or something else that's bothering you, like an itch or something, it's easier then to lose your temper or get annoyed by other people coming to talk to you. And now Peter's mic seems to be off. Can you not hear me? I'm quiet.
They can hear you now.
Okay. Drogo is now in his boyfriend's arms. I mean, if you want.
No,
probably not.
Not really, because Thomas is still alive. He's just somewhere off.
Yeah, Thomas is off doing weird elder things. Yes, okay. If it's in your fanfic, then yes, Drogo is finally in Thomas's arms, and they are having beautiful vampire sex somewhere on a beach, and it's very beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a good question. So there was a theory about the Herald, that the Herald was kind of pulling Drogo's strings and controlling him. And the answer is that was sort of true. So Drogo wasn't being puppeted by the Herald. But the thing about Drogo was that Drogo often was either absent or didn't care or was a bit confused. And so what the Herald would do was sort of be like the Drogo whisperer. So he would interpret Drogo's behaviour and little tiny movements, and then make a call, and then kind of be watching Drogo very carefully to see if he got it right or not. And of course, there were things that would stir Drogo into action. So when there was threat of a duel, or when people came and dissed him publicly, that would like snap him back into kind of action. But most of the time, he didn't even notice what was going on around him, unless it was very either ritualistic or a very direct predatory threat. So I guess I'd say about 50-50. But yeah, the Herald got away with a lot of stuff because of that, because he could just say, well, the prince says this. and no one was going to say otherwise, so that was fine.
Oh, that's just, talking about the Herald. Talking about the Herald has just reminded me of, so we were very collaborative over the Chronicle in terms of like, we were really collaborative in terms of like, you know, one of us will bring an idea and then we discuss it, and like if the other one didn't like the idea, we'll try and find something else that kind of ticks both boxes or worked well. Now, the Herald and the Herald's voice. So Peter, it was like just before the Chronicle was starting that you were.
I was playing Pyre.
Yeah. Yes.
I love
yes.
Pyre. By the way, it's a great game. If you've not played it, play it. It's got the best narrator. There'll be some arguments about. What's it called? I can't remember. There'll be arguments about other games having better narrators. Darkest Dungeon, that's the fellow. See, this is why you have to have an assistant storyteller when you're an ancient vampire. But yeah, anyway, I was playing Pyre, and it has a phenomenal narrator. I love that narrator, and so.
Does have a great narrator.
Yeah, the Herald was sort of my homage to that narrator voice. But anyway, when I did it, and I was like, I'm going to use that voice for the Herald.
Yeah, to which I was like, Peter, it's this fucking vampire world of darkness. You cannot use that ridiculous voice. You cannot use that fucking stupid voice. And then, of course, he kind of quieted down and just, you know, didn't disagree and didn't agree. And then in session one, it just did it. Now, I of course, I mean, I love the voice. I just think that it is fucking ridiculous.
But I'd like to thank everybody in chat who's saying nice things about it. Got my back. I appreciate that. But yeah, because it was funny. It was actually very rare that we hardcore disagreed on anything. There were points where one might suggest an idea and the other say, I'm not sure about that, and we'd discuss it.
Yeah.
But that was the only thing where you were like, Peter, no. And I was like that cat, you know, with like a thing on the edge of the shelf where it's looking at you like a glass, and you're like, don't do it, and it goes, boop. That was the one time that I was a naughty storyteller.
Yeah, I do also remember another time that, so obviously one thing that we had in the Chronicle was this idea of the games.
Yeah.
Which I really like as an idea that, you know, elders get really bored.
Yeah.
And sometimes they just want some neonates to tear each other apart for their amusement. Which is great, but I think we started calling it the games because we didn't have a proper name for it. And we were supposed to think of a better name for it. And then I remember that in session, like, you started talking about the games.
Yeah.
And I was just sat over here, like, doing tech, like, oh my god, we forgot to...
We haven't named it.
We haven't named it. So then it was just the games.
I just want to put in a brief thing, which was, of course, one of the key ideas about the games was based on the boat race between Oxford and Cambridge.
Yeah.
So we sort of fed into that a little bit where, of course, Oxford isn't called Oxford, it's called Oxfordshire, right? Because most domains are like a city name. Oh, it's London, it's Reading, it's whatever, but Oxford is better. so it's Oxfordshire. And the Cambridge, of course, is exactly the same. It's not Cambridge, it's Cambridgeshire. and that the human boat race is kind of echoed in the vampiric boat race. And that they kind of allowed politically some of these other domains to get involved, but very much as a sort of act of pity, you know. Yeah, you can have a little play around the sides while the real contest goes on. But that was just a little bit of real-world snobbery that I kind of wanted to throw in for funsies.
So if you have questions,
yeah, this could be your
last
chance.
What happened to the rest of the living memoriam characters? That's a good question.
There weren't that many of them, were there?
No, there weren't that many of them. But Bam and...
So Bam was the sire of Jasmine Blanc, who then took over. So yeah, because Bam was the Northern Gatekeeper originally, and then when Bam sired Jasmine took over the mantle, and Bam went off to have Bam-like adventures. And what's the name of Izzy's character? She also, but she didn't stay as long.
No.
She also went off and had adventures, and on one of those, because she was like a travelling mercenary, and on one of those adventures she met Holder, and they got on like a house on fire, and she told Katrina, thank you. Katrina told Holder about Oxfordshire, and it's because of Katrina that Holder travelled to Oxfordshire, and then, you know. I sort of imagine as well that eventually Katrina went hunting for the Bowman at one point, when she found out some of the Bowman's nefarious deeds, but that the Bowman always kind of slipped away or was under the earth asleep at the time or whatever, but that it was a kind of a little thing that went on. Yes, please do write other fanfics, and you know, if they're safe to put on the internet, then you can always send them to us and we'll put them on the website.
Were there any other surviving memorial characters?
So in the Tremere one, the Tremere died.
The Scourge, obviously.
And of course, the Scourge Sir Francis lived until the end of season 3.
Yeah, but it's one thing that's kind of interesting about Sir Francis was that we did have a kind of idea. Sorry, I've got we had a kind of idea of how she was, but we didn't have super details about her past or anything like that.
No, so it was a nice like blank canvas. So when Nat played, when she said, I'd like to do Sir Francis, we were like, brilliant, do what you want. And it was really cool because she then provided that backstory.
Yeah, and gave that character far more depth than we ever did.
Yeah, right, we'd just be like, oh, she likes fish or something, I don't know, whatever, right, on we go. So that was something, although lockdown obviously was a massive pain, in terms of us not being in the same location, because we were able to do things like the one-shots for Seven and the memoriams for Tamesis. Actually, it was something that I loved. I loved being able to tell the story of Oxfordshire's history, because it was something we had vaguely thought about, and very much informs everything in the present. And kind of, you know, and I love the idea that it kind of casts the various characters in a different light. And you kind of get to see also how Oxford begins or how it starts, but also then how it begins its decline. So from a kind of narrative point of view, it was really satisfying to be able to tell that.
For sure.
And
I'm really proud of the memoriams.
Yeah, me too.
I think that they were like a really great little story. They kind of wrapped up nicely and fed into everything that we had set up in the Chronicle and everything that we wanted it to be from the start.
And I've said it many times, but this is probably the last time I'm going to be able to say it, so I'm going to make a point of doing so, which was that the players were so good for the memoriams in terms of, not just like on the night, which they also were good on the night, but in terms of the commitment, because actually it was often like, you know, people had to do a bit of research, they had to, you know, and there were people who were like going back through old episodes for every appearance of a character, or, you know, like going into it with a level of professionalism that Mitch and I can only aspire to. So it was pretty great actually, and it was lovely having those other people bringing those elements of creativity. that again then shaped because obviously we didn't even know the Bowman existed, for example,
No.
until that session. That was just
Yeah.
a side thing.
Yeah.
We didn't also know exactly how the Tremere. We knew the basis for the Tremere issue, because one of the things about Sir William, I can't remember if I mentioned this on stream or not, but back in season 1, when you first meet him, Sir William walks with a limp, and he doesn't carry a sword or an axe like the other knights. He has like a dual dagger as a kind of tokenistic weapon that he brings into court. And he's always moving around slowly, and it's because he's nearly dead. Because when he is staked in that attack, they can't, there are fragments of this stake that are left in him that weaken him.
Yeah, so we had, I could show from the start, we had a little note. You could just see it up there, that he was attacked by hunters and staked. Which obviously we kind of took that idea and adapted it into something slightly different for the...
But the fact that the Tremere did what they did, also, it was nice because it also set up in our minds people like Cheng Li much more clearly.
Yes.
And
so
go on.
Briefly, one thing that one of the little details that we sort of didn't get time to put in right at the end of the chronicle is obviously Cheng Li gets to be regent of a new Tremere chantry,
which is of course because of the players
in Oxfordshire, which is of course because of the players, but that she names that chantry after...
I did get that in, actually.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, the Greenbrier building,
I just wasn't paying attention then.
Oh, Mitch. I thought you hung off my every word. But one of the details we didn't get time to do was there was a whole thing where Theodore had been trying to introduce soap to people. So one of the things that I meant to do in the last session was, because Joanne was no longer around, that Holder was going to be like, well, we need a fourth member of the Veem, and that Soap was going to be made the fourth member of the Southern Veem. There's a little touch, as a thing. Are you reading?
Yeah, I'm reading.
It's very wholesome.
I think you were saying something about the memorials before I rudely interrupted you.
Damn, well, it's gone now.
Slipped out of your old brain.
It slipped out of my old brain into the ether. It's gone.
I don't think there's many more secrets that I can...
No, I think that is a lot of... I mean, probably things will come up and we'll be like, oh yeah,
yeah. We'll stop streaming and then have...
like 100...
like 3-hour conversation.
100 thoughts, yeah. But that was the main of it. So yeah, but I guess because we're framing this as a storyteller thing, but from a storyteller point of view, most seasons are actually based around a question or a dilemma. So the first one was like, how well are the players going to get into the city and how are they going to do that? The second one was around what's going to happen between Drogo and Helena and the cities. And the third one was what is going to be the fate of Oxfordshire? And, where are we going to leave our characters as a thing?
We hear your thanks, Lane.
Yes.
And you are welcome.
You're very welcome. And thank you for,
keep
staying as kind of long as you did and because it's obviously it's a big deal.
I quite like Joanne's end with the sort of...
I did, actually.
Because she had a lot of kind of chaos and uncertainty around her throughout the chronicle, but I quite like that she got like a nice little peaceful end where she sat down with...
Yes, with McAllister. Yeah, because one thing we wondered about was whether it was going to be like, okay, you've got like one night and then Joanne was going to run off into the city and then be kind of chased. Now, because I don't want this to get too wholesome, I want to talk about one other little thing which we never got time to do. So one of the things that about vampires is they're all scumbags, even the ones that look like they're quite nice. And there was a whole thing where the Thin Bloods were providing Joanne with blood bags because as Joanne got older and her blood potency went up, she wasn't getting as much from regular blood bags. But she was lucky because she knew the Thin Bloods and they could give her like super potent Thin Blood alchemy blood. But the thing was, there's a process involved to make that blood, which is like 1,000 times worse than feeding on a person.
Yeah, it really is. Like it's so much more dangerous.
So I wasn't sure if it was going to happen, but one of the scenes I was kind of prepped for was Joanne has to leave in a rush, right? So she goes to say goodbye to the Thin Bloods and catches them in the act of doing horrendous things to people to get her some blood, and it's like dun dun dun, and that show their kind of monstrous side and kind of what happens with that. Because even Heather Kim, who looked like a sort of fluffy mum who had like a dog and all that kind of... she didn't have the dog, the other one had the dog. Even she had some pretty dubious stuff going on, and that's one of the things that we just didn't have time for. But, it was all there. Yeah, so one of the things about Thin Blood Alchemy is you can do it kind of with machinery, you can do it within yourself, or you can do it within a human being. And of course, because it's by far, I think, the most disgusting, they were doing it in human beings and making them be the kind of the place where all of that reaction happens. So yeah, it was pretty awful, and awful for the people involved. But it's okay because they were nice, smiley Thin Bloods. So that's right. Well, actually, to be fair, Stinky Norm was the alchemist, and we all knew he was a wrong and right.
And I think I liked the way that each of the players' endings went.
Yes, I was very pleased because I think there's a sort of disproportionate power on a last episode. Yeah. Even though a character might be going to go off and have glory, if the last scene you get of them is them being in trouble or them losing, it can feel like they lost, even though they sort of didn't. But actually, the endpoints were really nice, I felt, for each one.
Yeah, I think, because one of the things I think about vampires is that happy ending shouldn't really be a thing.
Yeah, it is supposed to be tragedy.
So I like, for Silas, for example, he kind of got what he wanted. He was on the path to be a squire, but really what that means for him is that he's going to have to learn how to be a horrible, horrible person.
Yeah.
In order to
do what needs to be done. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I think it's a peak vampire move to say, I really like this person, so I'm going to make them my ghoul. Right? That's peak vampire, and I loved it. Yeah. But obviously, some of those things where you get the hints of degeneration in the future. Obviously, Adam and Velvet are on a kind of like it'll be fine because they're only going to go into a bloodborne once a year or whatever. But so actually, no, they're probably fine. Nothing bad's going to happen there. Nothing bad at all. And obviously Theodore was well into Oblivion love by then. So that was...
So one of the things about Adam and Velvet... So this is like the least organised discussion. But one of the things about Adam and Velvet is that Adam began the game on Humanity 8.
Oh yeah. So this is something I really like about V5.
So Humanity 8 vampires can totally get pleasure out of sex.
Yeah, they can get it on just like a person.
They can get it on and enjoy it like a real boy.
Yeah, they can get their major boon, as it were. But the thing is, and enjoy it. But the thing is, obviously, there was a point where Adam's humanity went down.
Yes, it was around the time that Seth beat him.
It was around the time that Seth beat the living shit out of him, yes. It was around that time. And an impact of that was suddenly the thing that Adam, who was actually able to have a normal relationship with Velvet and get everything he could from it, suddenly couldn't. And at that point, he started to lean more into the blood, and he needed that much more. And obviously, as I say, if he drinks Velvet's blood, then he's not as depressed. So he had a lot of levers. Which was why, hilariously, he was sometimes using presents on Velvet to try and persuade him to have the blood. But Velvet is just so damn charming, he often managed to talk Adam down instead.
Yeah, so there was kind of like a quiet tragedy that was happening under the surface there.
Yeah.
We kind of managed to allude to, but yeah, like Velvet, or the nature of the relationship between them, and the fact that it wasn't allowed, did actually degrade Adam over
There was also a kind of interesting turn, which I quite liked, which was at the beginning of the Chronicle. Adam was always like, we've got to be careful, we've got to be cautious, all this stuff. And Velvet was like, no, we're lovers, let's let love win. And then obviously terrible things happened, and Adam was like, let's be really cautious. And then later on, when Adam was much more in the throes of the blood, he was the one going, come on, let's just do it. And Velvet was like, hang on a minute, let's think about this.
Yeah.
And like I enjoyed that flip. Yes, indeed, Humanity 8, you can definitely move forward in the act.
Yeah.
Humanity 7, you can do that. It's just not as fun.
Yeah, it's true.
It is in fact the act at that point.
But yeah, that was all of the endings.
Yeah, and we got
nice. We managed to reward Velvet for the fact that she basically manipulated her grandsire into murdering.
Yeah, so I should say a detail I didn't get time for is that not only had Enolf done away with Wallace and obviously Rafe, but he had also found out that Seth had some involvement in this, because ultimately Wallace will betray his brother with enough torture.
Oh yeah.
So Enolf would be looking for Seth. There would be a kind of hunt Seth across. Probably with Enolf on a horse, breaching the masquerade and people chasing after him, trying to cover it up. But that basically would be a thing at some point.
Who degraded the most?
Probably.
Joanne.
Oh, in terms of players, Joanne. Although Silas was not far behind.
I don't think any SPCs degraded more than...
What, more than 3? I mean... Well, you could argue the Bowman did. The Bowman lost all of his humanity. Obviously, Sir Francis was low to begin with, and she slipped down. Enolf slipped down. Drogo slipped down.
Bex, don't worry, because you told Seth to fuck off.
Yeah, you told him to skip town, and he did, and that's why he's not dead.
Yeah.
But it was also, I thought, the most Velvet way to deal with Seth. Like, Seth's under the impression that you've done him a solid favour, and had his back, which I think was a great way to get rid of him.
Yeah. So I think we had the idea that Seth probably runs up and finds Chester, he would have gone to Seth would have gone to Chester basically. Yeah.
In terms of Joanne's betrayal, it was not widely known actually. It was because obviously Amanda knew about it and Helena knew about it, but there weren't people.
I think maybe Mr. Whispers was catching wind of.
There were
because she kind of had tabs on.
Yeah,
Reading a little bit.
There were characters who wondered if something was going on, but no one knew and no one had evidence. Yes, Velvet's humanity did drop as well. In fact, I think the only character whose humanity didn't drop in session was Theodore's. He's a
good boy.
Yeah, because one of the interesting things about these Chronicle tenets is being nice doesn't matter, it's being loyal and being dutiful. And of course, Theodore was all about duty and honour and loyalty.
Yeah.
So weirdly, even though he was a monstrous torturer and killer at times, that was cool because he was doing it for the right people.
Yeah.
So it was fine.
I think I'm definitely glad that we had Theodore as a player character, because I liked the way that he did conform to the tenets, and that contrasted with the rest of the coterie who are like, this is awful, these are all monstrous people. And then Theodore was like, yeah, but so am I, so...
Yeah, and you kind of had like Theodore very much in line, Silas close to, but always kind of, he had convictions that were very human actually. So sometimes those convictions were threatened by the Chronicle tenets, or they would let him kind of bounce between them. And then Velvet and Joanne, who were just like, you can go to hell, Chronicle tenets, we'll do what we want. And it was nice to have that spectrum in the session.
Yeah.
Yes, Enolf does understand Velvet. One of the few of that line that he still trusts.
Enolf and his one humanity. Humanity. I think one of the other standout moments I really liked is a very classic vampire kind of thing was around Silas and Silas' stalker.
Oh, I love the stalker plot.
Yeah, the stalker plot was awesome.
And Silas's resolution of that plot was excellent.
Yeah, it was.
When the whole thing where he made it look like he'd saved her, and then the stunt specialty, and that he'd fallen off the roof.
Yeah.
And then she obviously thought that for 10 years she'd been living a lie and believing this guy was a vampire, and actually he was a normal guy, and that she idolised him, and she'd led to his death. It was like, hello, mental breakdown, here we go.
Yeah, so it's fair to say that it was not a good ending.
It was not a good ending for her, no. What happened to her? She ended up in an asylum. You broke her. She was ruined for good. Yeah. She was insane. But she couldn't cope, and so she had to be looked after the rest of her life.
Yeah. But the way that all panned out, I thought was just really, really good.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yes.
Sorry, I just remembered one other thing.
just the one more thing.
Just one more thing. So there was another thing that we had in our back pocket that we were going to do if the opportunity came in season 3.
Oh, yeah.
Because Silas had Gansuk as a mauler by that point. As we talked about earlier. But obviously Gansuk left. He was just like...
He was like, this is all on fire, I'm out of here.
This is all terrible and I'm leaving. And he did. But we did not let Phil have his XP back for his mauler, because one thing that we were going to do is that if Silas was really in a pinch and if he needed to get out somewhere, that the horse was going to show up.
Yeah, so there was a timeline. There was a timeline where if the Second Inquisition had started to get into Oxfordshire's society. So, for example, if Joanne had gone into court and just been like, "I'm going to take pictures of every vampire here," we're going to trail them all back to Havens and stuff like that. If the Second Inquisition was going to start getting information and going to move into Oxfordshire, the night before their strike, or the start of the night of the strike, the horse would have arrived for Silas and would have carried him away to safety. That would have been one of the things. We.
Good old Gansuk.
Good old Gansuk and his horse. So there is a thing I think we should say.
Yes.
Lots of people are like, what's the name of Gansuk's horse? So let us tell you, there is no name for Gansuk's horse. Because the Mongols didn't name their horses.
No. Because they had so many of them.
so it had no name, that's the thing.
Yeah.
So there you are.
There you are.
The secret finally revealed. We've been sitting on that for like 2 seasons.
That disappointing secret. Did you get to detail the Drogo's funeral as well?
I didn't actually. So we were going to do like a Drogo funeral scene and the kind of the laying of the old prince to rest and the knights and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We didn't have time for that. I dropped in a line as the thing that happened. In the same way, actually, I would have liked to have done a bit more around Silas's funeral, funnily enough, in season 2.
Yeah.
But if I'd done all of the things that I wanted to do, we'd have had like 7 seasons. And we were going to have a very cool thing where like James Douglas carried a big rock and added it to the to the stones, to the King's stones. Yeah. So
I was just reading.
We were just reading the. Yeah. See, there are other secrets being spilled. It's not just us.
Yes.
So that would have been interesting, obviously, if that had gone that way. But yes, I think that's it. But yeah, suffice to say, it was really fun, and it was very interesting from the point of view of running a chronicle with different tenets.
Did really enjoy our tenets.
Yeah, and some of the house rules, actually, I'm a big fan of. Taking up stuff from the book about, rather than rolling if their pool halved is sufficient as successes, just give it to them to move things forward. Like assume competence, I think is really good.
Yeah.
I like our frenzy rules. I quite like our conviction rules. It was great, and I think people's engagement with it was great too. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that was very evident watching this stream tonight, from my point of view, is when you go back and you look at the flowchart of chat's involvement, and how the players affect the chronicle, and also how the guest players in the one-shots affect it, and all of that stuff. That it actually there's something kind of I'm going to say it, disgustingly wholesome and kind of collaborative about the whole thing.
Yeah, right. Like it hasn't just been a collaboration between the two of us. It's actually been, you know, a very community-rooted thing, and with the players and everything.
So there's the last question. Can I please beatbox with dolphin noises? I'm going to say no, but I tell you what, I might try and beg Mitch to take the clip of me as a dolphin and turn that into a beatbox. How about that? For your viewing pleasure, and we'll throw it up on the website at some point.
But yeah, it was a wonderful time. I'm a little bit sad it's over.
Yeah. Oh, you know, actually, so something I should also say, whilst you're here, lovely people that you are, is to say a special thank you to Mitch. Because obviously I've mentioned the fact that I locked him in a wardrobe or a cupboard and made him work like a dog for hours on end. But also, you know, between every session we would always be discussing everything the players did, discussing what the possible, not just what could happen in the next session, but also what are the 3 or 4 timelines that could happen based on the players, what are the most likely things, how can we prepare for it, what things have I forgotten, all of that stuff, you know, was great. And I've got used to the luxury of an assistant storyteller now. I don't really want to run games on my own anymore. It seems like a lot of work. But yeah, he was great and worked very hard and was very tolerant, I suppose, my eccentricities. I guess that's the nice way to put it, throughout this whole process. So yes, thank you very much.
Well,
it's been a genuine pleasure to work with you.
Thank you.
And I think you added one might say, monumental amount to the Chronicle.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
So I think that might be it.
Yeah, I think that might be.
I mean, so whilst this is obviously the end of Tamesis, it's not the end of everything.
No.
Like, now Carlos is locking people in cupboards.
Still me.
It's like the more things change, the more they stay the same. What do I think of the anti-Mitch's knees gang? I might need some context for this. Have Mitch's knees offended you? Do we need to sort them out? Is that?
I think there's a couple of members of chat that are displeased. I forgot how that. I'm
right, and they're now coming with hatchets, yes. And you're for it. Well, I mean, I probably not tonight. I'm feeling quite well disposed towards Mitch right now. Ask me tomorrow, I might have forgotten about all of this. And I can maybe be persuaded. So yeah, I think we should probably blow kisses and
shall we fade back into the...
Let's fade away. Let's obfuscate out of here. But thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you for coming out.
For hanging out. It's been a pleasure.
I hope you found...
Yeah, I hope
at least one interesting thing.
Yeah, one interesting fact.
2 hours of rambling about bullshit.
And yeah, please do come join Carlos and his amazing friends for Blood on the Seven, which there'll be more news about that in the future.
Yeah. All right. So I guess this is goodbye.
Oh, one last thing. Mitch does have some crazy ideas that we'll be talking more about in the future. For things. I'm not going to say what they are, I'm just going to tease them in that kind of dirty way I like to do. So yeah, there are some interesting things that we might be collaborating on in the future. Keep your eyes peeled. It's a stupid expression, right?
Alright, goodbye everybody.
Goodbye you beautiful people.
Have a nice evening.
Have a lovely time. Have a cookie, I think you probably deserve it. And if you've got it, have Streetwaffle liquor, because that's the best. If I'd have had it tonight, I can tell you I'd have been drinking it.
All right.
All right.
Well,
we're going to obfuscate now.